Hello, and welcome to Out of the Fire podcast. Today, on this episode, I have a renowned figure in the interoperability space, Michael Westover. I looked at your history and CV, and you have a really impressive career and some really interesting things that jumped out at me about kind of everybody has a story of how they got into this.
Sure. So I feel like everybody's working in healthcare these days. Like there's no way to avoid it. So coming out of school, I worked for a healthcare consulting firm, consulting states and municipalities on their healthcare benefits. And that was great, but I wanted to be closer to the action. So I got an MBA with healthcare emphasis, and then I began working for a startup that did data integration and analytics. And that grew really quickly, bringing together payer data and provider data and seeing what we could do with it. It was called Humedica, and it was acquired by Optum. And in that, I worked for pharmaceutical organizations, and I consulted large provider groups. And I wanted to get closer to the action again. And so Providence reached out and said, "We're building this whole value-based care thing. Can you help us build our infrastructure?" I said, "That sounds like a fun project." So that's what I've been doing here at Providence for the last 11 or so years, just supporting them on building their value-based care framework, all the data that they need, bi-directional data exchange with payers and providers. And I've loved it.
That's great. And there's some similarities. I also did my MBA with a healthcare emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
And I also worked for a startup and doing data integration and analytics. So I think there's probably a lot of learnings from that. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. I mean, I would say what an MBA taught me is that I thought I knew what work was, but I did not know what work was until I was getting my MBA. Getting kicked out of a study room at 2:00 in the morning by people that are taking it over. I mean, people staying up all night to prepare for an exam. I mean, that really blew my mind about how hard people worked. And the connections that I made with just incredible people that are changing the world and that were willing to talk to me and give me advice. I mean, those things have been wonderful and inspiring.
Okay. Can you talk about, obviously Providence is a very large health system. I think 120,000 employees, right? And you guys have 50 hospitals and 1,600 clinics. I think I got that right.
That sounds right.
Something like that. Yeah. So like pretty big footprint. So do you feel like over the last 11 years, like, what is your take on what have you been successful at?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned that we're a big health system. I think it's at 7 states and in several different markets. And I think we have something like 150 value-based care arrangements and government programs, hundreds of data formats, tens of thousands of data files every year, just related to value-based care and interactions with payers and providers and their vendors, right? So we have a nice portfolio for learning and being able to make mistakes. I think one of the things that we've done well is that we've learned that each market is different. And so there's some things that I think make sense that should be market related. And other things make sense to do in aggregate and across the system. And I don't think there are too many of those things in healthcare. Healthcare tends to be pretty local. But my sense is that data ingestion and data processing, there's some very good reasons why you'd want to standardize that. Have very strong QA, very strong processes, very strong hands saying, we need to standardize and not do this in, 27 different ways. I think 80 different ways to ingest member rosters is not okay. And so I feel pretty strongly that data ingestion is something that can be done centrally. When it comes to value-based care, there's some things that we've done right and some things that we've done wrong. One of the things that we've done very right is understanding, trying to go all the way back to the contract and designing the contract in a way that it aligns incentives appropriately and that you haven't really painted yourself into a corner. I think in many value-based care arrangements, it's impossible to do well. It's impossible to take care of your patients appropriately. It's impossible to get the incentives aligned, so to pay for the work that you're doing, unless you've designed that contract appropriately and you've aligned the incentives so that both you and your payer partner are doing things appropriately, right? And you're both working towards the same goals of taking care of the patients and reducing costs and improving clinical quality measures, all of those good things. I think we've done a very good job of starting at the beginning and doing well on that. Also, we've done a good job of aligning on data. If you sit down, payers and providers have a history of tension, let's put it mildly. But when it comes to data, if you have a value-based care arrangement in place that's designed appropriately, payers immediately want to sit down with us and say, okay, what data do you need? What data do we need? And then you can work that out. And I feel like it's an excellent way to come together and forge relationships. So we have some fabulous relationships with payers around value-based care. because of the way we've structured those contracts appropriately, and we've had the ability and resources to sit down and talk about data.
For sure. Where do you think data is going in terms of the ease of data integration? Are we still seeing pretty much the same things that have plagued for years systems? And, we've come from a pretty large system, and I think it's pretty similar for how people do data. There's your EMRs, there's other systems. So there's probably what, 12, 1,600 different systems that are in
Yes.
in ho- in the system, and then you have to aggregate that, and you have to try to tease out that longitudinal record across all these different systems. It's not an easy task. So we're seeing an era of the healthcare data warehouses that I think kind of came and went, and now we're into this kind of like interoperability, right, with fire standards that are increasingly being used for exchange of data. Do you see that changing, or are we still kind of stuck in that muck of trying to deduce all these different, disparate, fragmented data? So,
Yeah, I see it changing. Can I talk to you about how messed up it actually is? I don't think people appreciate the level of
please,
mess
yeah,
upness that we're talking about here. So this is how it works. Let's say you want to share data with a vendor, like you sign a contract with a giant vendor, multi-million dollar contract to do value-based care analytics or something, right? The way it works is the vendor sends us a list of this is the data that we need. Let's say it's longitudinal record information, right? That you need to manage the patient. Then you spend a few months looking for someone to write that query to meet their spec. You go into the EHR's reporting database that has, let's say, 60,000 different tables, and then someone spends 6 months like writing a query, or let's say 3 months, right? Because they're solid. They write a query, they QA it, then you send the data to the vendor. The vendor says this doesn't match spec or the data's not coming full. You go back around back and forth. Takes 18 months and then you go live. Then your product can work. That is too long. And then to make it worse, 2 years later, the query breaks because there's been an upgrade to the HR. And then the person who wrote the query doesn't work here anymore. And so then you have to send someone else to go figure it out, rewrite the query. And it's one of the 10,000 queries that are running automatically that no one truly understands. Like, this is not the way to do business. And I know when it comes to data exchange with provider organizations, I feel that there are a lot of national initiatives going like TEFCA, and there are a lot of data standard things like HIEs and regional HIEs. I feel like what's often missing is we're not talking about the right data. We're exchanging data that folks don't care about. And then the data that really does matter, that moves the needle, we're not talking about. So I think what Providence has done really well, and I do think we are moving the needle again, is that we are sitting down with our payer partners and saying, what data do you need to be successful in our partnership? And then we say, this is the data we need to be successful. Let's say member rosters matter. How about the gap lists? Like the payer's the arbiter of how well we're doing on, um, you know, clinical quality measures, for example, right? What if we could get a solid list of these are the data gaps in a format that's a national standard that we can ingest? What about the adjudicated claims data? It's often masked and hiding the financial data. Like the information you really need isn't even there. So you're getting a data asset that's 97% of what you need, but the 3% missing can be the difference between, making $1 million and losing $1 million. And then it's missing the most important data assets, the data domains that you need to do patient care. If we can have strong conversations like that with our payer organizations, and they say, we need supplemental clinical data. And we say, we will knock that out of the park for you. Tie it up in a little bow, give you all the data you need and nothing more. And you'll be able to maximize your performance without hiring a vendor that sits in front of them. Like, so we've had a ton of success. We have great relationships with Humana. You saw that big announcement, Premera, Cambia, CHPW. We are working on doing bi-directional data exchange using data standards and what really matters for value-based care. I think there are huge opportunities in like rev cycle that folks aren't taking advantage of. And other parts of the business. I mean, identity, and there's so many opportunities to make progress here. I mean, it's the foundation for everything that we do.
yeah. And I could second that, having been in that quality team on the payer side and trying to get all that data together and run all the HEDIS measures and get your yearly submission together. We're trying to close as many gaps as you can. There's like this huge flurry of activity in the last quarter that in 2 months, there's 100 people in quality department. Everybody gets a gaps list. And if that gaps list is not accurate, which oftentimes it's not because you just talked about, payers don't get gaps lists from healthcare. from healthcare systems because I'm sure Providence probably one of the few that is willing to share that. But like things that are based on claims data are delayed, and the only true measure of real time progress is if you have on the ground kind of data, right? So
Mhm.
that's truly important. And the most successful, I think, health plans are the ones that have those arrangements to really get the most up to date data. And also, they, I think, do proactive like year round. They don't leave it to the last 3 months of the year. They work with the health system, with the providers, with care managers, and all the other folks. And I will die on my hill that I think the patients should be involved in that as well. But I know that's such a huge and such a strange proposition that people will run me out of town. Yeah. So, Humana, can you talk about what made that successful and like really? Uh, that was like a really amazing thing that just like came out, and I read that and I was like, wow, these guys are actually working together. That's like unprecedented.
I agree, that's exciting. I think what makes this one special is that Humana is a well-respected, I mean, they're very advanced in the interoperability space, and they have made a strong commitment to interoperability to support payer-provider data exchange. I think that is a big deal. So we could talk about where it came from. Maybe we'll talk about what it is, and then we could talk about how it was successful and what we did about it. But what it is we're talking about 5 data assets so far, but the idea is what information do we need to make value-based care successful? And we're going to align around using national data standards, so FHIR, and we're aligning around modern APIs. So instead of storing the information on a server that folks have to access, and that we need one for every single payer, this is a standard API that we're pulling the data from. And we're starting with the member rosters, like which members are we jointly caring for, which makes a lot of sense because everything else is built on that. So the idea is that we will be getting member rosters from them using standard APIs and the national standard. And then there are a bunch of other provider organizations that they're going to be giving that same, the same APIs are going to be providing access to them. So not just Providence, but all of their providers that would like that, or vendors that are working with them. And then on the Providence side, we're working on producing clinical data that they need, the supplemental clinical data to meet the value-based care quality measures in the standard format. So we're going to be providing that to them that they need. And also we flipped on Epic Pair Platform for them as well. So they'll get access to some data that can flow through those systems. And then also that we're working on, there's the provider access API portion of like 0057, the interoperability requirements. We're going to be getting claims data in that standard format, and they're going to be getting financial information, so not scrubbed. It's going to have some of the optional fields too, which is what we need to manage our populations. And we're also talking about getting financial performance on the risk arrangement in a standard format as opposed to multi-tabbed ugly Excel spreadsheet. And then the gap lists for what clinical and other gaps are available are related to the contract pertaining to this risk arrangement. And if we can get that in a standard format, we won't have to spend all of this energy, all of these people processing it. We're not going to have as many mistakes. It's going to be more accurate. It'll flow directly into our system so that we can do patient care. And we think that that is fantastic. Why it's been successful is because we have a bunch of, I think we have something like 30,000 lives that are in risk arrangements where, we're both jointly incented to have very high clinical quality to make sure that we're reducing the total cost of care appropriately, where there are unnecessary costs and to do the right thing by the patient. So because we have that in place, when I reach out to folks like Chris Walker, who's the head of interoperability at Humana, he's incredibly eager to get on the phone and say, yes, we need better data from you. And what data do you need? Because the payer cannot do this alone. They need providers, and they need patients, and they need the data flowing as quickly and as accurately as possible so that we can jointly partner. If this were going to happen to us instead of with us, it's not going to be as successful.
How do you make that leap from just, regular data exchange between healthcare vendors and organizations and payers and providers being basically like you talked about it just now with CSV files that are dropped based on some query and FTP'd over, and that's probably like 80% of healthcare organizations run on that, right? How do you make the leap to really justify, hey guys, we've invested into all this infrastructure, let's use it, let's enable the FHIR APIs, let's do FHIR bulk, let's do all this stuff. What did you have to do to convince people to do that?
I mean, the answer is pain. Like, it's painful. So if we're talking about, I think we have 80 different formats for just member rosters. I mean, how many ways can you exchange Michael Westover at this address and this risk contract? I mean, and some of them are a snapshot of who are the members at a point in time. Some are like one record for every member per month. Some are there's spans. Some are, I mean, you get multiple versions based on the year, and some it's Excel file. I mean, there are all of these different ways we're getting data. And the number of people it takes to handle that complexity and the changes and the amount of technology and vendors you need to like insert into the process, it's just incredibly painful. And so when there's that level of pain on both sides, we come together and we see these folks at conferences and I mean hymns and that kind of thing. And so I'm friends with these folks. And I feel like when you have a relationship and you're able to talk about the pain that you have, and they say, we have the same pain and we have the value-based care arrangement and the incentives are lined up, it's easy to come to a solution when both sides understand the pain and the incentives are aligned, which I think is what we did.
And it's just to let people know, it's not like just one directional. It's actually like true bi-directional exchange from what you're talking about. You're sending data and you're getting reciprocity and receiving data that you need. So it's like the true intent of interoperability is it's a two-way street. It's not just, well, I'm a patient, I'm just downloading my data, or I'm a provider and I'm getting a list of gaps from payer. No, it's enabling this back and forth, really true exchange of data, right?
Yes. Yep. It's bi-directional. It's also a good I feel like sometimes we start with building the entire network and then just hoping folks will come to the network. And we haven't really been exchanging the data, and we haven't really tested the things that are, being forced on on the organizations in the network. And I feel like these types of relationships allow us to work through the kinks of the data exchange and say, what do we really need to be successful? And then things that don't work, we can jettison, and things that do work, we can lean into and do more of. And then once you've built the data exchange with an individual partner like Humana or with a few partners, then you have the APIs in front, and then you can set up a network and you can connect to the national networks and have those APIs connect to the networks too. But I feel like you're kind of starting at the beginning, which is what data do you need to be successful, like point to point, and then you scale to more broadly. I don't know if I know if folks have other perspectives on that, but it's worked well for us.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to walk, crawl, walk, run, right? And people always like just get out of the gate and start running a marathon, and then they're surprised that they collapse midway through when they haven't even run 5 miles yet outside of their house. So it's like, guys, understand that this stuff is hard, right? It has been attempted on and on and on over the years. Many companies have folded, probably hundreds different startups that have attempted this, and health systems are still doing the same old thing. And so the successful people are the ones that do pilots, do start small, and then prove the business case probably, and really have a shared responsibility there between, uh, the two stakeholders, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned success. We've had a lot of success. If you look at, I mean, some of the measurable points, I mean, there have been some things that have been successes for us that we did not even expect. Like if the data is coming in a standard, so instead of Mike Westover in one source and Michael Westover in another source, and the addresses are formatted differently, and this information is there and information isn't there in the other source. If you're using a national standard, patient matching becomes much easier. So the armies of people it takes to manually match patients inside of the EHR, a vast majority of that goes away. When we started pulling the data using the national standards out of our EHR, the data quality went up immensely. So instead of writing a query using 27 tables out of the 60,000 in the backend reporting database, like we were pulling the data using the G10 APIs in the front end, data quality jumps up dramatically. We saw a 47% increase in the number of patients with usable clinical quality data. I mean, that's a huge win where the providers aren't doing any more work. We're just doing better at extracting the information and communicating it to our partners. And those are just a couple examples of how this focus on looking at the entire feedback loop of where's the data created, where's the data coming in incorrectly. Let's look at each hop and see where the data can be distorted along those hops, and then the feedback coming back from the source of truth and seeing where along the line we can improve the data quality. I don't know how anybody can be successful in value-based care or clinical quality or working with a payer organization without having a deep understanding of each of those points. And you just think it's going to flow magically to everyone because you did the work and you're going to get it and it's going to count in your favor. It's just not reality today.
So the two big deadlines that loom ahead in the future, primarily for payers, but I think it's going to also require a lot of work on the provider side, is obviously the CMS 0057
Hmm.
prior auth requirements, and then also we have the digital quality transition that NCQA and now CMS everybody are talking about, which there's not, I don't know if 2030 is still going to be the date, but it is happening. And I think you guys are involved. And how were you successful in, you hear a lot about this, payers and providers are not speaking the same language, right? And you talk about
Mhm.
value-based care, you talk about those arrangements, understanding those savings kind of lift all boats. So like you can't be successful as a payer without certain value-based care arrangement. You can't be successful as a provider in this landscape, and then also meeting these regulatory standards. So how were you successful of that, getting that alignment across the board?
I mean, there's a lot there. And I would say we've had different levels of success depending on the thing because they're different. There's the data, the digital quality measure component of what you talked about. There's the 0057. And then there's a prior auth component of that, but there are other components to it as well. I mean, think of uh, the the provider access API is one of those things. And then we could talk about our relationship with NCQA. So there's a lot of what you covered there. And I think there are very few provider and payer organizations that have gotten like that have won in the prior authorization space so far. So, and the reason why I think that is because it touches so many different parts of a provider organization. It touches, there's the EHR component, it touches rev cycle, you have the payers that are involved, you have the policies that need to be digitized. I mean, there's a lot that needs to happen for all of that to be successful. I think getting all of the internal teams across our provider organization, for example, has been difficult. It's not just something that is limited to value-based care or rev cycle. Also, the technology has taken a while to become incorporated into the EHR. And so because the technology is not there, and then you have vendors saying that they can do it, and you have the EHR saying that they can do it, and then there are the national networks coming in and saying that they can help with it. There's a lot of complexity. So I think part of what the way to be successful on, let's say, the prior auth portion of 0057 is to, I think, get into the weeds and understand what's going on. If you don't, you're going to be taken advantage of by a very expensive vendor that's not using the latest technology, but says they have a lot of connections. And then you are pigeonholed for the next 100 years, because once you have a vendor, it's hard to disconnect from them. So we've been really, I think, deliberate about like, these are the vendors, these are the capabilities. Do we want to use a network? Can we work with the state of Washington to see what the state of Washington and other organizations are doing? So maybe we can, choose similar network partners and that kind of thing. And we honestly haven't completed those prior auth decisions yet. And we don't have data flowing, but we're working hard on that. And I think we're farther along than most folks there. When it comes to digital quality measures, we've been actually working very closely with NCQA, and we have purchased one of their products, and we were doing, you could call it a pilot, with them on exchanging digital clinical quality in a way that can flow directly into HEDIS and be a much more efficient way to get clinical quality measures in, with the idea to reduce the audits that happen. They're called PSV audits that are highly manual. And the wild thing about these audits is that they actually don't improve the quality of the data. They just either kick out data or like say, yep, this data is valid and it flows through, but nothing has changed at the source. So all of those problems will continue to
No.
flow forevermore. That is
And
that is how it's
you're
structured.
spending data, you're spending time just paying kind of auditors. So it's kind of like, instead of, you improving your taxes, or like, here's your tax situation, you just pay a lot of money to somebody to do your taxes and tell you what your taxes are. And then that's not going to help you to actually make it better, right? So like the whole point of HEDIS, I think, is to report these quality measures, but there is a huge industry because it's still like a very manual effort. And you alluded to the PSV, primary source verification process, that really is a huge burden on all the providers, right? It's like something that I think, having been in that space, every quality department in the United States like dreads every year having to go through that, right? And it's a huge amount of money that's like spent. So it's kudos to NCQA, and then you guys are trying to move to the new kind of better way of doing it and reviewing that data.
Yeah, and I think we're asking the questions, right? Like, so if the data comes out of the certified EHR and it's in its national standards, and we don't change it, and then we send it to the payer, like, do we really need an audit on that thing, or can we do one audit? I mean, let's change the way that we think about this. Also, I think There's so much we could talk about when it comes to clinical quality and things that don't make sense in that space today. You're right, it is a tens of billions of dollar industry a year. And I think any disruption could impact many vendors and payers and other organizations. So I see why it's sensitive. But I feel like there's a lot that we need to improve there. And a lot of this data, this work, we're pulling data using national standards out of our EHR Epic. And then sending the minimum necessary to the payer with a little, tied up in a little bow, just the needed data, nothing more, and having strong QA on the data as it's coming out to see that we can fix it at the source instead of fixing it through audit. I mean, the goal here is try to limit the amount of data that's pulled through manual extraction, which is, I mean, you talked about PSV audits, but even just pulling the PDF reports out or the PDF documentation of the longitudinal record and sending it off to the payer and then having a nurse have to go after it, it's not great. Having an HIE sit out there that has all this, munged versions of different data coming together and different levels of quality, can we reduce the need of that? Can we reduce the need of people? I'm not kidding. There are people here at Providence. Their job is to look at our EHR, copy the information manually to provide payer portals so that we can do better on clinical quality measures. It's not a few people. It's a huge number of people. If we can get the
That's a
data
huge number
flowing
of people.
natively in discrete formats flowing to the payer organization, can we limit or eliminate the need for that? I mean, we don't have the luxury to have armies of people manually matching patients and copying data from one place to another. We
Yeah.
need to digitize and move to the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, I think what you're saying is so important to understand is that it's not that we have to prove that the new way is better. We know it's better.
Mhm.
It's not a huge logical leap to understand that hundreds and thousands of people doing something manually is probably not a good process, specifically when you have hundreds of millions of dollars on the line. Yet this is where we are, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that implementing data quality monitoring at scale so that you can see and track the data quality from your core systems, having a standard like we have now with US core standards, right? Which kind of standardize the way some of this clinical data can be represented, right? And it's all kind of standardized in the format. And so now you can score it, you can track it, you can see what relative quality it is, and is it good enough for HEDIS? And I think that the answer is yes. We've already seen NCQA said that we're moving to CQL based quality
Mhm.
measurement, right? Which means that we're not going to use claims data, although it's part of the equation, but it's not going to be the only data that we use, right? So,
Yeah. I
um,
mean, Multicare and Infor did a really interesting white paper showing that it could be used not just for like Medicare Advantage HEDIS measures, but for like the ECQM type measures that are used by CMS for the government programs. And there's no reason we need to have different processes. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to come together and standardize. And while you were talking, there's this one perspective. I don't know if I should be bugged by it or if I should see it as an opportunity, but so many folks view interoperability as a compliance exercise. Like, I'm going to do 0057 at the last moment possible, the least amount of effort possible, and I'm going to check the box. And I think that's great. I mean, I can see why you'd want to do it that way. But wouldn't it be better to look at areas that are incredibly meaningful to your business and to your patients and to focus on those areas of data exchange so that your business can thrive for the foreseeable future? I mean, I feel like it's organizations that can do good work and communicate what they're doing and that's interoperability, that are the ones that are going to be successful. So, like identifying the core business needs and then drilling into those data flows. I mean, I'm incredibly biased because that's my job, but I just feel like that is where healthcare organizations are going to succeed or fail, especially on the provider side, especially on the payer side.
words. Okay, so I have a little bit of a rapid fire segment here,
Nice.
and I'm going to ask you one question, and then you can answer it as well as you can. But what's the one data element that is always wrong?
The one data element that is always wrong, I would say financial information and claims data is always wrong. And it's masked to the point of just masking it into oblivion, where they say, oh, we're giving you some of the data, but it's not enough to be usable, right? Because you need to know the total cost for a patient, right? You don't need to know most of the cost. So that the financial information matters to patients, it matters to Providence, it matters to payers, and having that data not flow accurately is not, even if there's a good reason for it, I'm not a fan. And I wanna add one more thing on that while I'm on my soapbox. Providers are sharing basically the entire longitudinal record out of their EHR. Could that be used for anti-competitive purposes? Absolutely, right? Could it be used for things that are not appropriate and that the patients don't want? Absolutely. And yet we still do it because we have contracts in place that limit how that data is used. Now, payer organizations will often say, we can't share this data with you, provider, because it could be used for anti-competitive purposes. Like, yeah, it could, but why don't we just set up our structure, our arrangements so that we share the information that is needed and we won't use it for anti-competitive purposes. We need to have a level of trust. The trust can't just go one direction where providers trust everyone and then there doesn't have to be the trust in return. I think that is an important conversation.
Is it part of that, like, when you go to buy a car and you go to multiple dealers, you'll get a different price from every dealer, and like they don't want to tell you what their actual price is? Is it part of that? Like they don't want you to know what
It's part of that. So they would say, I mean, I'll try to steel man the argument. They do not want to they actually have contractual limitations around exposing their rates. And because they don't want to expose their rates, I'm not gonna do anything with those rates. Actually, my team can't even share that data with the contracting team. We have firewalls in place. But they would say because that data could be used for contract negotiations, we cannot give it to you. Or there might be state and federal limitations around types of data that can be exchanged. It often tends to be the most important data, like the behavioral health information. There's a huge impact on patient care and clinical care, and we think should be flowing, but some organization will say, sorry, we can't share it with you. It's too sensitive. So I should say there are good reasons why it's not happening, but there are, I think, side effects that hurt patient care and the ability to do value-based care when we do that. And if we can trust each other and say, I will just use that clinical information to take care of patients, I will just use that financial information to take care of patients and manage this contract and not for negotiation or marketing or other reasons, I think there's a way that we can make this work together. We've done it with clinical. Let's do it with the financial and the operational data too. We've been working on sharing clinical data for multiple decades, but the operational and the financial data exchange is new, and we need to be able to have these discussions.
But I feel like the way this is going to happen nationally is by folks like yourself and others coming in and sharing that conversation, sharing the insights. What do we need to do to enable this? And is it possible? Like, I think people talk about TEFCA and the potential of TEFCA
Yeah,
and the QHINs enabling this sort of true interoperability. But to this day, we still don't have any payers signed up to TEFCA, right? It's all provider systems. So we're kind of missing that. The main goal is, yeah, me as a patient having access to data is great. I love it. I want to get all of it. But ultimately, I want my payer to have access to my data, and I want them to be able to use it for more than just, sending me, my explanation of benefits. So like,
definitely.
what do you think about that conversation that needs to go further than what it's maybe has been going right now?
There are many ways we could take that one around TEFCA in particular. But I think you said something early in this call. If we can allow patients to extract their healthcare data themselves and digitize it, and we can create some tools that patients actually need to use to manage their healthcare, I think that is where the true interoperability is going to happen. Because if it's payers and providers and vendors, all these, I'd say, profit-seeking organizations that have strong organizations to act as bridge trolls, sitting on top of the data exchange and like blocking it and charging for it. And I think that that is going to continue for a little. I mean, honestly, I see a way of how these networks are shaping up that when money starts changing hands and it's a financial opportunity, it's going to be really hard to get the data flowing seamlessly and cleanly across these organizations. But if we can insulate patients from that, I think the long-term pathway of having certain populations that care a lot about their data, so patients that have chronic conditions and they're very much invested, cancer, heart disease, this type of thing, rare diseases, and they're able to extract their financial data from payers and their clinical data from their provider organization, have tools that sit on top of it. I see that as a huge long-term opportunity that could benefit patients. I'm with you, Gene. I hope that business to consumer to business pathway, I think is going to be happening more and more over time, although it might take a decade or two. And there's some, walled gardens and some invested interests that don't want that to happen. When it comes to TEFCA, I think that there are huge opportunities around being able to exchange data nationally. I think that's going to continue to evolve. I agree with you that the payer organizations will need to join. I don't think that TEFCA is the only like the CMS aligned network. I think that eHealth Exchange has a network. There's Care Quality is a thing that has its own set of problems, like big problems that we could talk about too. But like I'm a fan of having different ways to do networks where we fix some of these problems on a smaller scale and then scaling. Having the whole, there's only one way we do things. Everybody signs a blank check and they'll exchange whatever data anybody wants on it. And there's going to be 1,000 connections to every network and everyone can pull whatever data they want anytime. And there's not going to be QA around it. I mean, and they're not going to be different levels of trust. Like I would like to see more experimentation around how we do a lot of this national network data exchange. And I like the way we're doing with Humana. And then if that works, we can scale that to other payer organizations and, Washington networks. And then we can connect that to a national network on things that are working well. I think there's a way to do this intelligently.
If you're an organization kind of sitting on the side and you wanted to get into interoperability and you see the success that Providence and Humana have had, and maybe the organization has relationships also with Humana and Providence, how do they get involved to also be interoperable?
You mean Humana to be interoperable with everyone in the nation or to be interoperable with other, yeah.
Well, to kind of take the example of you guys coming together and sharing data in an interoperable way and getting value out of that. If there's other organizations that want to do the same thing, how do they get involved?
Well, I mean, this is the fun part, right? So we have the API set up. We have 4 payers that we're working with right now. And then when we talk about it, like when we sent out the Humana notice, we had a bunch of large payers reach out to us and say, "This is really exciting. Like, can I talk to you?" There's also some really interesting conversations that happen around, can we think about restructuring the way value-based care is done? Like right now, value-based care is, you can think of it as a hedge against risk, where the payers, they're gonna, if they do really well in the and if they do really well, then they're willing to share some of what they've done with an organization to incentivize them to change their behavior or get data. But that's more of a hedging risk. Like we're already making a lot of money. If we're going to make an extreme amount of money, maybe we can share some of that. We can do the shared savings contract and give that to a provider organization. But it's around a very limited population size of a few thousand lives, let's say, that are in a value-based care contract. What if we thought about that differently and we just said, okay, what if Humana, we look at value-based care differently and we say, what does Humana need to be successful? What does Providence need to be successful? It's not around a limited risk population. We can do a lot around data and let's partner around clinical quality and let's partner around like really serving our lives, the lives that we're taking care of together and doing different kinds of value-based care. There's a huge amount of opportunity around that for organizations that are truly partnering and not just doing risk hedges or using it as contract negotiation games, which is a lot of what value-based care is today. I um I want all of the payers that we work with to reach out to me and say, let's exchange data at scale. Let's do this the right way. Let's change the way we do value-based care. And then when that works, let's bring other providers in our region together. And this does not work if it's just Providence or just Multicare or just Intermountain Healthcare in Utah. Like if it's just the 3 of us, that's not enough, right? We need to do this at scale across the nation for everybody.
And you need the labs, you need the retail pharmacies, you need the PBMs, you need all the other intermediaries that are involved that um, have access to that data to pull the really complete picture, right? Because that's what you really need if you really want to be able to affect change.
Exactly. But I think payer provider is a really good place to start because our
Yeah.
vendors, they have a huge incentive to come along because they are getting data in infinitely, infinite number of formats that are incredibly messy. And so if they can standardize, they can become more efficient, they can provide more value, or at least they can provide not value in cleaning the data, they can provide value in actually doing things that move the needle and help healthcare, as opposed to just, sitting in the data and processing it, changing it from one form to another. And so I like the pair provider starting point. You're right that there are a bunch of other players in the space that we need to come along with us, but there's just so much opportunity. It's not like we're gonna solve it and everybody's gonna be done. There's enough here for a large number of organizations and different types of organization to fix things in a meaningful way that will make money for their organizations and help patients along the way.
Okay. So that by itself, I think, was a great a way to kind of end our conversation. But I'll throw one more quick hit in.
Sure.
Just are you doing anything cool or exciting? Or actually, let's not make it cool or exciting, but let's make it actually like useful with AI. So like, give me one use case of like stuff that you guys are doing with AI that's actually working, moving the needle, taking burden away from providers, etc.
I'm really excited about the potential of AI and it scares me. I'll tell you why it scares me. It's so hip and sexy today that I'm worried that all of our all the data engineers are just going to stop what they're doing and start working on AI tools. And it's not an idle concern. That's a real thing that could really happen to these organizations.
I
We
think
are
it's
using
already happened.
yeah, this is really happening. Like we want to do an AI project. I'm like, how's this going to help us? We're going to process data faster, better, cheaper. And they're like, it's going to be really cool. We're going to have a cool chatbot. Maybe that's really helpful. And I just can't see it. But um, I am really excited about AI sitting on top of our data ingestion pathway. We're actually working on this now of feeding all of our reference documentation, all of our data dictionaries, all of the national standard information into a kind of a learning center, like having a knowledge base, and then using that to help with quality as we're doing checks, to have AI that sits on top of our data flows and scanning and looking for errors. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. There's also a lot of opportunity to have AI help with mapping and processing our contracts and pulling the relevant metadata about our contract, which is the foundation for like which levers you need to pull to do well in the contract. There's a huge amount of opportunity there. We're in negotiations with a vendor on that right now. But my team in particular is using it around AI that sits on top of our workflows and looks at the data quality and the knowledge so that we can do more with fewer people and faster. Could we be doing more? Absolutely. Am I scared of doing too much with it and it not being actually helpful? Because I hear all these stats about only 20% of AI projects are successful or add any value. Yes,
Yeah,
I'm worried
yeah.
about that too.
But I think like we also are not going to learn, and it's not going to get better if people are just sitting on the sideline waiting for the perfect time. I think that
Yes,
just as I'm sitting there at night, and my wife now hates me because I'm, instead of watching our show in bed, I'm like down there with my laptop with Claude Code, and I'm just addicted to it, right? Because it's like I have a
I
whole
love it. I absolutely.
a team of software engineers basically working for me, and I can build whatever I want. But it's like it's addicting, right? So, but at the same time, it's different. Like if you're in an organization, a business with priorities and set goals, and it kind of opens up, I think, a lot of can of worms. But I think
Yeah.
that the only way you're going to get better at it is if you start learning and applying those learnings. And you
I'm
know,
with you. Yeah, we have a few applications we use, like web applications that we've used, and we're working on putting AI and connecting it to all the code bases to use it to just manage our code and rewrite code and like connect the like next gen. I mean, build things, change things, and that will absolutely be allow us to do more with those types of things.
well, Michael, thank you very much. Again, Michael, you're on the. If people want to see some of the latest kind of things that you're involved in, you're on the Da Vinci working group,
I'm on the
I
Da
believe,
Vinci steering committee, and I am
steering
also
committee.
there's the trebuchet part of Da Vinci, the trebuchet fire pilots that I'm active on because
Uh,
I'm very interested in like practical ways to utilize fire and make it better. So if anybody wants to reach out to me through Da Vinci or just on LinkedIn, like I'd love to chat with them about fire and how to use it and have it actually help your business and not be a sideshow.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael Westover. And if you want to look at more episodes of Out of the Fire podcast, you can go on any podcast platform and check out all the other episodes. But I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, Michael.
Thank you, Gene. I enjoyed our conversation very much.
Thank you. I did as well. Thank you. All right.
Bye.